The rusty shears bit through Primula's auburn hair like teeth through silk, each snip falling to the dirt floor of her in-law's cabin with the finality of a coffin nail. Her mother-in-law, Hestia Grimwald, held her down with iron-strong fingers, while her sister-in-law, Iphigenia, wielded the shears like a weapon of war. "This is what happens to hussies who can't keep their husbands alive," Hestia snarled, her breath hot with whiskey and hatred. "You killed our Bartholomew with your wanton ways, and now you'll wear the mark of shame." Primula's scalp burned where the dull blades had scraped too close, and blood mixed with tears on her cheeks. Her husband had been dead only 3 days thrown from his horse while riding drunk to the saloon, but already the Grimwald women had decided she was to blame. "Please," she whispered through split lips, "I loved him. I never—" "Shut your lying mouth." Iphigenia grabbed the pot of charcoal soot from the fireplace and began smearing it across Primula's face in jagged streaks. "This is the mark of the widow witch. Now everyone will know what you are." The black paste stung her eyes and filled her nostrils with the smell of burnt wood and ash. Through the cabin's single window, she could see neighbors gathering to watch her humiliation. Reverend Mordecus Blackbane with his thin smile, shopkeeper Octavius Pennywhistle counting coins while his wife clutched her shawl, children peering. Between their mother's skirts like this was some traveling carnival show. Primula had been married to Bartholomew Grimwald for barely 8 months, brought to Copper Ridge from her father's failing farm in exchange for 2 milk cows and a mule. She tried to be a good wife, but Bartholomew drank more than he worked and struck her when the whiskey made him mean. Still, she'd never wished him dead, never imagined the town would blame her when his own recklessness killed him. "Now you." "Listen good, girl," Hestia hissed, yanking Primula's shorn head back. "You got 3 choices. You can throw yourself in the river and save us all the trouble. You can let us burn you as a witch come Sunday after church. Or you can walk out of this town right now and never show your cursed face again. But I have nowhere. Not our problem." Iphigenia kicked her in the ribs, sending her sprawling toward the door. "Choose quick, before we choose for you." Primula struggled to her knees, her scalp bleeding and her face painted with shame. The crowd outside pressed closer, their faces twisted with the kind of cruel excitement that came from watching someone else's misery. She recognized most of them, people who'd smiled at her wedding, who'd bought pies from her kitchen, who'd nodded politely when she passed on the street. Now they looked at her like she was something diseased. She was reaching for the door frame to pull herself upright when the shadow fell across the threshold. A massive figure blocked out the afternoon sun, so tall and broad he had to duck to fit through the doorway. When he straightened, Primula found herself looking up at the biggest man she'd ever seen. He was Apache. That much was clear from his bronze skin and the way he wore his black hair long and loose around his shoulders. But he dressed like a white man in leather pants and a cotton shirt, with a gun belt riding low on his hips and boots that had seen 1,000 miles of hard trail. His face was carved from granite and weathered by wind, and his dark eyes held the kind of stillness that spoke of dangerous things. The crowd outside went silent as death. "What's this?" the giant asked, his voice deep as thunder rolling across distant mountains. He looked from Primula's mutilated hair to her painted face to the shears still clutched in Iphigenia's white-knuckled fist. "None of your business, savage." Hestia spat, though her voice shook with fear. "This is a family matter." The Apache's eyes narrowed as he took in the scene, the blood on the floor, the soot on Primula's face, the way she crouched like a beaten animal. When he spoke again, his words carried the weight of mountains. "Family don't do this to family. She killed my son." Hestia shrieked. "Witched him to death with her evil ways." "Did she?" The giant stepped further into the cabin, and suddenly, the small space felt even smaller. "Or did your boy drink himself stupid and fall off his horse like everyone in 3 counties knows he did?" Iphigenia raised the shears like a weapon. Get out. You got no right. She never finished the sentence. The Apache's hand moved faster than a striking snake, catching her wrist and squeezing until she dropped the shears with a cry of pain. His other hand settled on his gun butt, and the message was clear as mountain air. Girl, he said without taking his eyes off the grim old women. You got a name? Primula, she whispered. Primula Doverite, Primula. He tasted the name like he was testing its weight. You want to stay here and let these crows pick you apart, or you want to come with me? She stared at him in shock. Leave with a stranger? An Apache warrior who could snap her in half without effort? But what choice did she have? Death in the river, death at the stake, or exile into the wilderness with no food, no money, no hope of survival. Double quote she began, then stopped. Through the window, she could see more people gathering. Someone had brought rope. Someone else carried a torch despite the afternoon sun. The giant warrior extended his hand, scarred and calloused but steady as stone. Your choice, girl, but choose quick. Primula looked at his hand, then at the faces outside, neighbors who turned into a mob, in-laws who turned into executioners. She thought of Bartholomew lying dead in the churchyard, of the life she'd tried to build that had crumbled into ash and hatred. Then she reached up and grasped the Apache's hand, feeling strength flow into her like water into parched earth. You're coming with me, he said simply, pulling her to her feet. And Primula Doverite, her hair shorn and her face painted with shame, walked out of that cabin and into whatever came next. The Apache's name was Nawal, and he rode a horse the size of a small mountain, a black stallion that moved like liquid shadow across the rocky terrain outside Copper Ridge. Primula sat behind him, her arms wrapped around his massive frame, trying not to think about what she'd left behind or what lay ahead. Where are we going? She asked as they crested a ridge that looked down on the town she'd called home for 8 miserable months. Away from there, Nawal replied, his voice rumbling through his chest. Rest comes later. Behind them, smoke rose from Copper Ridge. As the mob ransacked her former home, looking for evidence of witchcraft or devil worship or whatever would justify what they'd almost done to her. She could hear dogs barking and voices shouting, but the sounds grew fainter with each mile. Primula had never been this far from civilization. The landscape was harsh and beautiful, red rocks jutting from the earth like broken teeth, scraggly. Pines clinging to impossible slopes, and overhead a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Her scalp still bled where the shears had cut too deep, and the soot on her face was starting to flake off, leaving her looking like some half-painted war mask. Why? Did you help me? She asked as they followed a game trail along a creek bottom. Nawal was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he spoke, his words measured and careful. My sister was married to a white man once. When he died of snakebite, his family did the same thing to her. Cut her hair, painted her face, called her witch. What happened to her? She died. Winter took her before I could find her. His voice carried old pain, carefully controlled. Won't let it happen twice. They rode in silence after that, the horse picking its way across terrain that would have challenged a mountain goat. Primula found herself studying Nawal's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way his dark hair moved in the wind, the careful alertness in his posture that spoke of a man used to danger. He was nothing like her dead husband, who'd been pale and soft and weak despite his cruelty. As the sun began to set, they stopped beside a natural spring that bubbled up from between two boulders. Nawal dismounted first, then lifted Primula down with hands that were surprisingly gentle for their size. Wash, he said, gesturing toward the clear water. Get that paint off your face. Primula knelt by the spring and cupped the cold water in her palms, splashing it over her cheeks and forehead. The soot came off slowly, turning the water black as it swirled away downstream. When she finally looked at her reflection in the still pool, she barely recognized herself. Her auburn hair, once her pride, was now a ragged mess that barely reached her shoulders. Her face was pale and hollow-cheeked from months of barely eating enough to survive. But her green eyes were clear for the first time in longer than she could remember, no longer clouded with fear or resignation. "Better," Nahwal said, offering her a piece of jerky from his pack. "Now you look like yourself." "I don't know who that is anymore," Primula admitted, taking the tough meat gratefully. She was hungrier than she'd realized. "Then you got time to figure it out." He built a small fire with practiced efficiency, the flames dancing against the growing darkness. "No rush. Got nothing but time." "Where are we going?" she asked again. "My place." "Up in the mountains. Safe there." "And then what?" Nahwal looked at her across the fire, his dark eyes reflecting the flames. "Then you decide. Stay if you want. Leave if you want. Your choice." The word hit her like a physical blow. Choice. When was the last time she'd had one? Her father had chosen her husband. Bartholomew had chosen how she spent her days. The Grimwalds had chosen her punishment. But now this stranger, this Apache warrior who owed her nothing, was offering her the rarest gift of all. "Why?" she whispered. "Because everyone deserves choice," he said simply. "Because my sister never got one." They slept on opposite sides of the fire that night, Primula wrapped in a blanket that smelled of horse and leather and something else, something clean and wild that reminded her of pine forests and mountain streams. She'd expected to lie awake worrying about what came next, but exhaustion claimed her almost immediately. She woke to the sound of Nahwal moving around their camp, already breaking down their simple shelter and preparing for the day's ride. The sun was just painting the eastern peaks gold, and the air was thin and cold in her lungs. "How much farther?" she asked as they mounted his horse again. 2 days. Maybe 3 if the weather turns." But as they rode deeper into the wilderness, following trails that seemed to exist more in Nahwal's memory than on the ground, Primula found herself less concerned about their destination. For the first time in her adult life, she was traveling towards something instead of just enduring whatever happened to her. The man riding in front of her was a mystery, an Apache who dressed like a cowboy, a warrior who showed unexpected gentleness, a stranger who'd risked his life for someone he barely knew. She wanted to know his story, wanted to understand what had shaped him into someone who would ride into a hostile town and rescue a woman marked for death. "Nahwal," she said as they stopped at midday to rest the horse and eat. "That's not an Apache name, is it?" He smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him. "No, it's from my mother's people, far to the south. Means jaguar in the old tongue. And your father?" "Apache warrior. Met my mother when his war party raided south of the Great River. Took her back to his people, but she never forgot where she came from." His expression grew distant. "She taught me her language, her stories. Said a man should know all his blood. Not just half. Is she ... Dead. 10 years now. Soldiers killed her when they came for the reservation." His voice was matter-of-fact, but Primula could hear the carefully controlled anger underneath. "Father, too. Sister and I were all that was left. I'm sorry. Past is past. Can't change it. Can only decide what comes next." As they rode on through the afternoon, Primula found herself watching the way Nahwal moved with his horse, not riding it so much as being part of it, like they were one creature instead of two. She'd never seen such horsemanship, not even from the cowboys who'd worked her father's ranch. "How did you learn to ride like that?" she asked. "Born on horseback," he said with a hint of humor. "Apache way. Horse is not tool horse's partner." "Will you teach me?" He turned to look at her, surprise flickering across his weathered features. "You want to learn Apache way?" "I want to learn your way," she said, and meant it. Something shifted in his expression, then a wall coming down, a door opening. "Yes," he said, "I teach you." As the sun set behind the peaks and they made camp beside another mountain stream, Primula realized she was looking forward to tomorrow for the first time she could remember. Nawal's home sat in a hidden valley where 3 streams converged and wild horses came to drink at dawn. The cabin was built Apache-style, low and strong, designed to weather mountain storms, but with white man's conveniences like glass windows and a stone chimney. Gardens flourished in the rich soil beside the water, and fruit trees lined the cabin's southern wall. "It's beautiful," Primula breathed, sliding down from the stallion's back. After 3 days of hard riding, her legs were unsteady and her back ached, but the sight of this peaceful sanctuary made her forget her discomfort. "Built it for my sister," Nawal said, his voice carrying old sadness. "Thought she might come here someday, bring her children. Make new life away from the reservation, away from white towns that would hurt her. She never saw it? No, by the time I found her." He shook his head, unable or unwilling to finish. "Come, you need food, rest." Inside, the cabin was sparse but comfortable handmade furniture, colorful blankets that spoke of Apache weaving traditions, shelves lined with books in 3 different languages. A pot of stew simmered over the fire, filling the air with rich scents of meat and wild herbs. "You were expecting company?" Primula asked, noticing the table was set for 2. "Always ready for company," Nawal replied, ladling stew into wooden bowls. "Never know who might need shelter." As they ate, Primula studied her rescuer by firelight. Away from the tension and violence of Copper Ridge, he seemed different, less like a weapon ready to strike and more like a man carrying too much solitude. His movements were economical and graceful, his attention shifting constantly between her and the world outside the windows. "Do you get lonely up here?" she asked. Nawal considered the question seriously. "Lonely is better than dead. Lonely is better than caged on reservation. Lonely is better than being hated for what you are, but it's still lonely." "Yes," he admitted, "still lonely." After supper, he showed her to a small room that had clearly been prepared for his sister women's clothes hanging in a wooden wardrobe, a mirror on the dresser, wildflowers in a clay vase. It was more comfort than Primula had known in years. "These were hers?" she asked, touching the sleeve of a blue cotton dress. "Some. Others I bought, hoping ... He cleared his throat. "Use what you need. Rest now. Tomorrow we begin." "Begin what? Teaching you to choose?" Primula slept deeply that night, lulled by mountain silence and the security of thick walls around her. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through windows that faced a meadow where deer grazed peacefully among the wildflowers. She dressed in her benefactor's sister's clothes, simple garments that fit well enough, and found Nawal outside, grooming his black stallion with patient strokes. "Good morning," she called, surprised by how normal the words felt. "Morning. You hungry?" "Starving." He'd prepared breakfast eggs from chickens she hadn't noticed the night before. Bread baked in the Dutch oven, coffee strong enough to wake the dead. As they ate, he outlined what he called her education. "First, you learn to survive. Hunt, track, read weather, find water. Then you learn to defend yourself, knife, gun, fighting without weapons. After that, you decide what kind of life you want to build. And if I decide I want to leave, then you leave. But you leave strong, not helpless." For the next month, Nawal kept his word. He taught her to track deer through mountain meadows, to read the sky for weather signs, to identify edible plants and healing herbs. Her soft city hands grew calloused from handling rope and tools. Her pale skin bronzed from constant sun and wind. More challenging was learning to defend herself. Najewel was a patient but demanding teacher, showing her how to hold a knife properly, how to aim a rifle, how to use an attacker's size against them. "You're small," he said one afternoon after she'd successfully thrown him over her shoulder using leverage instead of strength. But small can be advantage. Fast, clever, unpredictable. "Is that how you learned to fight?" she asked, helping him to his feet. "Learn from necessity. Apache boys start training young have to, if they want to. Live long enough to become men. And Apache women? Apache women are fierce as jaguars when protecting their young. They learn to fight too." His dark eyes studied her face. "You have jaguar in you, I think. Just buried under years of being told you were prey." The comparison made her flush with unexpected pleasure. No one had ever called her fierce before, quite the opposite. But as her skills improved and her confidence grew, she began to see what Najewel meant. There was strength in her, strength she'd never been allowed to use. One evening, as they sat by the fire after a particularly challenging day of weapons practice, Primula found herself really looking at the man who'd saved her life. His profile was strong in the firelight, his hands steady as he carved a piece of wood into some intricate design. She'd grown comfortable with his presence, with the sound of his voice and the careful way he moved around her. More than comfortable. If she was being honest with herself, "Najewel," she said softly. "Yes? What happens when my education is complete?" He set down his carving and looked at her directly. "What do you want to happen?" The question hung between them like smoke from the fire. Primula knew what she wanted, had known for weeks, if she was being truthful. But wanting something and being able to have it were different things entirely. "I want to stay," she said finally. "I want to build a life here, with you." Even knowing what people would say. Apache and white woman? "People already call me witch," she replied with a bitter laugh. "What's one more scandal? Could be dangerous, for both of us. Living is dangerous. Dying is safe." She moved to sit beside him on the log they'd arranged as a bench. "I'd rather be dangerous with you than safe with anyone else." Najewel's hand found hers in the firelight, his fingers intertwining with hers. "Then we build life together. Face whatever comes together." When he kissed her, it was with the careful reverence of a man who thought he'd lost his chance at happiness. And when she kissed him back, it was with the fierce joy of a woman who'd finally learned what it meant to choose her own path. Outside, night birds called to each other across the valley, and the wind whispered through pine branches like a blessing from the spirits of the mountain. Winter came early to the high country, blanketing Najewel's valley in snow that sparkled like diamond dust under the pale sun. Primula had never experienced such cold, but she found herself loving the clean bite of mountain air, and the way the world looked scrubbed new each morning. She'd been living in the valley for 4 months now, and the woman who'd been dragged from the grim old cabin barely existed anymore. This new Primula could track an elk for miles, could put 3 bullets through a playing card at 50 yards, could read weather signs in the flight of birds and the behavior of horses. More importantly, she'd learned to see herself through Najewel's eyes, not as a victim or a witch or damaged goods, but as someone worthy of love and respect. "Storm coming," Najewel said, checking the horses in their shelter. "Big one, maybe 3 days." Primula looked at the sky, noting the high, thin clouds that had been building all morning. A month ago, she wouldn't have been able to read those signs. Now she could feel the change in air pressure like a physical weight. "How big?" she asked. "Big? Enough to cut us off from the outside world for a week, maybe more." The prospect should have worried her, but instead Primula felt a warm anticipation. A week alone with the man she'd come to love, safe in their mountain sanctuary while the storm raged outside. It sounded like paradise. They spent the day preparing, bringing in extra firewood, checking their food supplies, making sure the animals had everything they needed. As they worked together with the easy coordination of a team, Primula reflected on how different this was from her marriage to Bartholomew. With Bartholomew, she'd been a servant, expected to anticipate his needs and absorb his anger when things didn't go his way. With Nowell, she was a partner consulted on decisions, valued for her growing skills, treated with a respect that still sometimes took her breath away. "Primula," he said as they secured the shutters against the wind that was already beginning. "To Howell, there's something we need to talk about." The seriousness in his voice made her pause. "What is it?" "Spring will bring travelers through these mountains. Traders, prospectors, maybe cavalry patrols. People will see us together and word will spread." She understood what he was saying. A white woman living openly with an Apache man would cause talk, and talk would bring trouble. The kind of trouble that ended with ropes and bullets and unmarked graves. "Are you having second thoughts?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "No." His answer was immediate and firm. "But I want you to know what you're choosing. There will be no going back to white society. No respectable marriage, no place in proper towns. You'll be marked as squaw to people who see Apache blood as contamination. And you'll be marked as the savage who corrupted a white woman," Primula replied. "The danger cuts both ways. Yes, but I chose this life long ago. You still have options." Primula stepped closer, close enough to see the concern in his dark eyes, the love he was trying to hide behind practical warnings. "Let me tell you about my options," she said. "I can go back to some white town where I'll always be the witch widow, who lived in sin with a savage. I can try to find another husband who'll beat me for sport and blame me for his failures. Or I can stay here with the man who taught me to be strong, who treats me like I'm worth something, who loves me enough to give me the choice to leave." "Primula, I choose you," she interrupted. "I choose this life, this valley, this future we're building together. Let them call me what they want, I know who I am now." The first snowflakes began to fall as Nowell pulled her into his arms, his kiss tasting like promise and forever. By morning, the world outside would be transformed, but inside their cabin, the most important transformation had already taken place. They weathered the storm wrapped in each other's arms, talking through the long nights about everything and nothing: his childhood among the Apache, her memories of her father's farm, the books they'd both read, the dreams they carried for their shared future. "Tell me about your sister," Primula said one night as wind rattled the shutters and snow piled against the door. Nowell was quiet for a long time, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. Her name was Ayana Eternal Blossom in Apache tongue. She was 3 years younger, but always the brave one. When soldiers came to take us to reservation, she spat in Captain's face, told him Apache spirits would curse his children's children. What happened to her after she married the white man? His name was Douglas Fletcher. Seemed decent enough, treated her well, built her a house, spoke of loving her. Nowell's voice grew bitter. But when he died of rattlesnake bite, his family showed true colors. Said she'd cursed him, that Apache blood had poisoned his soul. Like what happened to me. Exactly like that. By time I heard what they'd done, winter had already taken her. Found her body in a cave, wrapped in the wedding dress Fletcher had bought her. She'd carved her Apache name in the stone wanted to be remembered as Iana, not as Douglas Fletcher's Indian wife. Primula pressed closer to his warmth, understanding now why he'd risked everything to save her from the Grimwalds. "I'm sorry. She made her choice, just like you made yours. Can't protect people from their own hearts. But you can try to save them when their hearts lead them into danger." "Yes," he said softly, "can always try." When the storm finally broke, they emerged into a world transformed. Snow cloaked the valley in pristine white, and icicles hung from the cabin eaves like crystal fangs. The silence was so complete it seemed to ring in their ears. Beautiful, Primula breathed, watching the way morning light turned the snow-covered peaks pink and gold. Yes, Newell agreed, but he was looking at her instead of the landscape dot as they went about the work of digging out from the storm, checking on the animals and restoring their routines. Primula felt a deep sense of rightness settle in her bones. This was her life now, not the life others had chosen for her, but the one she'd claimed for herself. Spring still months away, she said as they watched the sun set behind the western peaks, painting the snow-covered valley in shades of rose and purple. Good, Newell replied, pulling her against his side. Gives us time to make plans. What kind of plans? The kind that matter. Marriage plans, Apache style. Maybe children someday, if we're blessed. Definitely plans for dealing with whatever trouble finds its way to our valley. Think it will? Find us, I mean? Trouble always finds people who choose love over fear, he said, but we'll be ready for it. As they stood together in the growing darkness, surrounded by the vast silence of their mountain sanctuary, Primula felt no fear of the future. Whatever came, they would face it together, not as victim and rescuer, but as equal partners in a love worth fighting for. Next one won't miss, Primula said calmly, already having another round chambered. And before you ask, yes, I can put 5 more shots in a group you could cover with a silver dollar. Newell taught me well. Cornelius stared at his niece in shock. This wasn't the timid girl he'd known, the one who'd accepted an arranged marriage without protest and endured Bartholomew's abuse in silence. This was someone entirely new, dangerous, self-possessed, absolutely unafraid. What happened to you? He asked, genuine bewilderment replacing his anger. I learned to choose, Primula replied. I learned that I'm worth fighting for, worth defending, worth love, things you never taught me. Your father is dead, and you helped kill him with whiskey and bad debts. Don't speak his name to me. The wounded man was back on his horse now, swaying slightly but conscious. Blood had crusted black on his upper lip, and his eyes were already beginning to swell shut. Sheriff, he mumbled, let's go. This place feels cursed. It is cursed, Newell said with dark humor. Cursed to protect those who find sanctuary here. Bad medicine for those who come with ill intent. One by one, the riders began turning their horses toward the valley mouth. Only Cornelius held his ground, staring at Primula with an expression caught between rage and something that might have been loss. You were supposed to marry well, he said finally. Make a good life, have children, honor your family name. I did marry well, Primula replied. Better than I ever dreamed. As for children, she placed her free hand on her still flat belly, and Newell's eyes widened with sudden understanding. We'll see what the future brings. The revelation hit Cornelius like a physical blow. His niece wasn't just living in sin with a savage, she was carrying that savage's child. The family bloodline would be forever tainted with Indian blood. Abomination, he whispered. Blessing, Newell corrected, moving to stand beside his wife. His hand covered hers on her belly, protective and proud. Great blessing. When? He asked quietly, for her ears only. Spring, I think. Maybe early summer. You sure? 3 weeks late, and I've never been late. She smiled at him, radiant with joy and certainty. Are you happy? Instead of answering with words, Newell lifted her off her feet and spun her around, his laughter echoing off the valley walls. When he set her down, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. Happy don't begin to cover it, he said. Cornelius watched this display of affection with growing horror. Bad enough that his niece had degraded herself with a savage, now she was breeding with one. The child would be neither white nor Indian, accepted by neither world. That baby will be cursed, he said. Half-breed bastard with no place in civilized society. That baby will be loved, Primula shot back. Raised by parents who chose each other freely, who respect each other, who'll teach it to be proud of all its blood, Apache and white both. The world will never accept. The world can go to hell, she interrupted. We'll make our own world, our own acceptance. Better than anything your civilized society ever offered me. Cornelius looked around the valley one last time at the thriving gardens, the well-built cabin, the horses grazing peacefully in meadows where wildflowers bloomed. Despite his prejudices, he couldn't deny that his niece looked healthier and happier than he'd ever seen her. You really mean to stay here? He asked. Live like this? Raise children like this? I mean to live free, Primula said simply. Free. To love who I choose. Free to raise my children with dignity. Free to make my own mistakes instead of suffering for other people's choices. And if trouble comes? If cavalry patrols or Indian agents or bounty hunters track you down, then we'll handle it, Nawal said. Together. The word carried such certainty, such absolute partnership, that even Cornelius could hear it. Whatever else his niece had found in this remote valley, she'd found a man who would stand with her against the world. Come on, Blackthorn, Sheriff. Griswold called. Sun's getting low and we got a long ride back to town. With visible effort, Cornelius dragged his attention away from Primula and back to the practical matter of retreat. He'd lost this battle completely. His niece was beyond his reach or influence, protected by a man who could kill him without breaking a sweat. This isn't finished, he said, but his words lacked heat. Yes, it is, Primula replied gently. It's been finished for months. You just didn't know it yet. As the riders disappeared through the gap that led out of the valley, Nawal gathered his wife into his arms, careful of the new life growing inside her. Think they'll come back? She asked. Maybe. Probably with more men next time. Are you worried? Should I be? She smiled up at him, her green eyes blazing with the fierce protectiveness of a woman defending her chosen family. Not as long as I can shoot straight and you can fight dirty. Then no, he said, kissing her forehead. Not worried at all. 1 year later, Primula sat in the shade of her apple trees, nursing her infant son while her husband worked in the garden nearby. Little Joaquim, named for Nawal's Apache grandfather, had his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. A perfect blend of two worlds that would make him strong in both. The child had been born in early summer during a thunderstorm that shook the mountains, delivered by Nawal's hands with the calm competence of someone who'd helped bring life into the world before. When the squalling, perfect boy had drawn his first breath, Primula had wept with joy at the sound. He's beautiful, she'd whispered, counting tiny fingers and toes. He's ours, Nawal had replied, and that had been even better. Now, watching her husband coax vegetables from the rich valley soil while their son nursed contentedly, Primula reflected on how completely her life had changed. The terrified woman who'd been dragged from the grim old cabin existed only in memory, replaced by someone who'd learned her own worth and claimed her own happiness. Riders coming, Nawal called softly, not looking up from his work but somehow sensing movement beyond the valley rim. Primula's hand went instinctively to the rifle, leaning against her chair, but as the figures drew closer, she relaxed. These weren't hostile visitors. The lead rider was a woman, and the others appeared to be families with children and wagons. Who do you think they are? She asked. Refugees, maybe? Or settlers looking for land? The woman leading the small group was about Primula's age, with sun-weathered skin and the kind of practical clothes that spoke of hard travel. When she reached the cabin, she dismounted and approached with her hands visible and empty. Mrs. Thornfield? She asked uncertainly. I'm Esperanza Montoya. We heard from the traders that there was a woman living up here who might help people like us. People like you? Primula asked, though she was already beginning to understand. Folks who don't fit in regular towns. Mixed families, runaway wives, people the law considers ... problematic. Behind Esperanza, Primula could see what she meant. An older woman with graying hair sat beside a man who was clearly Indian, probably Navajo from his dress and bearing. A younger woman held a baby while a dark-skinned man who might have been her husband or lover stood protectively nearby. Children of various ages and mixed heritage played quietly around the wagons. "How many of you?" Nahuel asked, setting down. His hoe. 14 adults, 9 children. "We've been traveling for 2 months, looking for someplace safe to settle." "What happened to make you leave?" Esperanza's face hardened. "Different things for different folks. Maria there," she gestured. To the older woman, her husband's family tried to burn her for witchcraft after he died. Carlos and Luz got run out of 3 towns for the crime of loving each other across color lines. The widow Pemberton lost her homestead when her husband's creditors decided she was too old to work it alone. Primula looked at the tired, hopeful faces gathered in her valley and saw echoes of her own story in each one. These were people who'd been rejected by the world for the crime of being different, of choosing love over convention, of refusing to accept the narrow roles others tried to force on them. "This is good land," she said slowly. "Room for more cabins, more gardens. The hunting's excellent, and there's plenty of water." "You mean?" Esperanza's voice caught with hope. "I mean welcome home," Primula said firmly. "If you want to stay." "What?" Followed was the most joyful month Primula could remember. The new arrivals threw themselves into building homes and breaking ground for crops with the desperate energy of people who'd finally found sanctuary. Nahuel proved invaluable as a guide and teacher, showing the men how to read weather and track game while sharing his knowledge of the land's rhythms and resources. The women bonded over shared experiences of persecution and a fierce determination to create something better for their children. They established a school taught by Widow Pemberton, who'd been a teacher before her husband's debts forced her into exile. They organized a defense network with signals and safe positions in case of attack. Most importantly, they created a community where differences were strengths rather than weaknesses, where mixed-race children could grow up proud of all their heritage, where women could speak their minds and men could show gentleness without shame. "It's working," Primula said one evening as she and Nahuel watched their neighbors gather around a communal fire to share food and stories. Little Joaquin slept peacefully in her arms, surrounded by the sounds of laughter and acceptance. "Better than I hoped," Nahuel agreed. "These people needed each other. Just took them a while to find the place where they could come together. Think we'll have trouble? When word gets out about what we're building here, probably. Fear makes people do stupid things, but we'll be ready. We'll be ready." 6 months later they were. When a cavalry patrol arrived with orders to investigate reports of a mixed-race settlement harboring fugitives, they found a well-organized community prepared to defend itself. The captain, a young man named Morrison, who clearly didn't relish his orders, faced not just Nahuel's steady rifle but 24 other weapons in the hands of people who'd already lost everything once and weren't about to lose it again. "We're not fugitives," Primula told him calmly. Joaquin strapped to her back in Apache fashion while she kept her Henry rifle trained on the soldiers. "We're American citizens exercising our right to live peacefully on legally claimed land." "Ma'am, I have reports of what? People of different races living together, children being educated regardless of their bloodlines, women owning property and making their own decisions." Her voice carried across the valley like a bell. "If those are crimes, Captain Morrison, then half the frontier is criminal." The standoff lasted 3 tense hours before the captain finally admitted what everyone could see: the settlement was legal. prosperous, and posed no threat to anyone except the prejudices of small-minded people. As the soldiers rode away, Primula felt the same fierce satisfaction she'd experienced when facing down her uncle's posse. They'd built something worth defending, and they'd proven they could defend it. "What now?" Esperanza asked, watching the dust cloud disappear. "Now we keep building," Primula said. "Keep growing. Keep showing the world that there's another way to live." Years passed. The settlement grew as word spread through the network of outcasts and refugees about the hidden valley where differences were celebrated. Children who'd grown up as outcasts anywhere else became leaders here, their mixed heritage making them bridges between communities rather than barriers to acceptance. Primula. And Nawal had 3 more children too. Daughters who inherited their father's quiet strength and their mother's fierce independence, and another son who showed early signs of becoming a natural diplomat. All of them grew up bilingual and proud, equally comfortable with Apache traditions and white customs. "Do you ever regret it?" Nawal asked one evening as they sat on their porch, watching their grandchildren play in the same meadow where they'd first made their stand against the world's hatred. "Which part?" Primula asked, though she already knew the answer. "Any of it. Leaving the white world, choosing me, building this life." She looked at him, still strong and handsome despite the silver threading his hair, still the man who'd risked everything to save a broken woman from a mob's justice. Around them, the valley hummed with life and laughter, with the sounds of a community that had grown from their single act of defiance. "Never," she said firmly. "This is exactly the life I was meant to live. Even knowing what we had to sacrifice, what people still say about us, especially knowing that." She reached for his hand, feeling the same spark she'd felt that first day when he'd pulled her from the wreckage of her old life. "We didn't sacrifice anything that mattered, Nawal. We just traded other people's expectations for our own happiness." As the sun set behind the western peaks, painting the valley in shades of gold and crimson, Primula reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the terrified woman whose hair had been shorn and face blackened with shame to the matriarch of a thriving community, she'd traveled further than the miles could measure. The giant Apache who'd said, "You're coming with me," had given her more than rescue. He'd given her the chance to become who she was always meant to be, and she'd chosen well.